Norm Roule is an expert on the region. He travels to the Middle East quite often. And Norm, thank you so much for joining us here in the Cipher Brief studio day. It's a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you for speaking with me today.
I don't know that this was necessarily a surprise for anyone, these Israeli attacks on Iran. There had been some rumors that they were going to happen for a while now. Was there anything about this operation, Norm, when it began that surprised you?
Well, I'm not sure about how the operation is rolling out. In fact, I think it is demonstrating that the Israelis have indeed achieved and maintained operational supremacy over Iran's air defenses, which says a lot about U.S. military technology and is going to speak a lot about where this campaign goes. I think what is unclear is what is victory for Israel in this campaign? What is success? What do they hope to achieve that allows them to end this campaign?
And this has been going on, as you know, more than anyone else, Norm, for decades. Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon, Israel's promises that they're not going to allow them to develop a nuclear weapon. There's been a lot of rhetoric that Iran was within days of developing such a weapon. But I'll be honest with you, it was the same thing I heard 20 years ago when I first started covering the Middle East. How do you ever gauge what the truth, I guess, of how close Iran is actually getting to a nuclear weapon? I mean, obviously there are intelligence sources on this, but it seems like that tagline hasn't changed much. What do you think about that?
Well, the timeline has changed, and it's basic science. The amount of high enriched uranium that Iran has accreted is unprecedented. The amount of the level of that enrichment at 60% is unprecedented. The fact that Iran devotes most of its enrichment capacity to 60% enrichment, which has no civilian use, and indeed it is a military grade enrichment, but it is the sort of enrichment you use for military propulsion systems, which Iran does not have. Right. So you've got an awful lot of bad things going on just on enrichment. Most of Iran's sites are underground to a greater extent than in the past. Iran's centrifuges are far more advanced than they were. Hence, they produce high enriched uranium faster than 10 years ago. So the situation is much darker. And Iran has on its shelf being developed two extremely advanced centrifuges that are some years, but eventually will come online. And of course, Iran's ICBM program, as described in the DIA's Golden Dome announcement, is a stunning development on its own.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up in terms of the technology, Norm, because one of the most successful attacks ever was Stuxnet, which used cyber operations to disable much of Iran's nuclear program, at least taking it offline for a while. But this is, as you mentioned, a different era. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the threats because of this, what you call extremely advanced centrifuges?
So in essence, a centrifuge is rated on its capacity to produce high enriched uranium in a certain period of time, known as a separative work unit, or a SWU. So at the time of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Iran was using what were known as the IR-1s, its basic centrifuge, which had, we'll just say, a capacity of 1 SWU a year, 1 kilogram of high enriched uranium a year. We'll call it something like that. An IR-4, the IR-6s that came out, suddenly they're 8 times more efficient or 10 times more efficient. So you can produce much faster and with a smaller array of centrifuges. Well, the IR-8 and the IR-9, Iran has one each, but sooner or later they'll have cascades of these. They're 25 and 40 to 50 times as advanced. So what that would mean is if once these are online, you would have very little time by which Iran could produce weapons-grade fissile material, and the facilities, a covert facility in particular, could be hidden very easily. Now, one more point there. Iran has ceased cooperating with the IAEA to tell it about the parts and pieces it's producing for its centrifuges. Why is that important? Well, if you know, because of cooperation with the IAEA, how many centrifuge parts are being made, how many are broken, and how many are produced, you have a sense of what they have. But if you don't have those numbers, you don't know if they're producing more for a covert facility or not. So now just imagine you have these advanced centrifuges and you don't know where they're located, and they're producing potentially nuclear weapons grade material. It's unacceptable. And in fairness to Israel, it's a very different technological environment than we had in 2015. And at any point, Iran could have said in negotiations, we disagree with the IAEA. They're a bunch of stinkers. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop producing 60% enriched uranium. We're only going to produce what we need for civilian purposes. And we're going to open up our program to the IAEA to show we're good people. And instead, they did the opposite. Whenever the IAEA complained, Iran would say, to show you we can't be pushed around, we're going to make even more advanced centrifuges and more 60%. So this week, the IAEA Board of Governors censured Iran for the second time in 20 years. And Iran's response, we're going to increase the number of advanced centrifuges in the one facility that looks as if it were designed to build nuclear grade fissile material, the enrichment facility at Fordow.
Norm, you've studied Iran for much of your career. You served as a national intelligence manager for Iran at ODNI. In terms of Iran's retaliation for this strike, we saw drone strikes in Israel overnight. How much muscle can Iran afford to flex at this point? You've got more pressure from President Trump today, calling these strikes by Israel excellent, encouraging Iran to come back to the negotiating table. How much power does Iran really have, or a muscle, I guess, that they can flex in retaliation?
And this is why everyone should read the Cipher Brief every day, because you ask the questions that count. The answer to that question in the next couple of days is going to decide perhaps the near-term future of the Middle East. So let me unpack this. Israel, according to initial press reports, has killed multiple Iranian senior officers, perhaps as many as a dozen, in an unprecedented attack, and their staff. So you now have the people who would have ordered ballistic missile strikes. They may now all be dead. So up front, the system of response may not exist, which may produce confusion and a delayed response. But the second point is, if Israel is able to, in follow-on attacks, destroy launchers, mobile launchers, is able to destroy the missiles themselves, and Iran is not able to provide that responsive attack, what does it now say about Iran's capacity as an offensive power in the Middle East? Is Iran defanged, much as Hezbollah has been defanged? But let's now take this in the opposite direction. Let's say that Iran does achieve an extraordinary and, God forbid, unfortunate success against Israel with massive civilian casualties. Then you now have potentially a much greater Israeli counter-response. There are 200 to 250,000 Americans in Israel that could pull the United States in. So the events that may occur around Iran's missile program in coming days will tell you much about where this campaign is going, what kind of country Iran is going to be perceived as being as a threat in the near term, and where this conflict will go.
I want to talk to you about the regional implications of this. What are the indicators you're looking for in terms of Iran's proxies and potentially using what are clearly, they've lost quite a bit of power over the last couple of years, whether it's Lebanese Hezbollah. We've seen what's happened in Syria. They've lost a foothold there. How are you thinking in terms of Iran potentially using proxies as any kind of response?
Well, I think when you're looking at Iran reconstituting its proxies or using them now, you have to think in terms of time as well as space. So, for example, in time, if you're looking at right now, they don't have a lot of options. Hamas is obviously unable to support them. Lebanese Hezbollah, they've had actually, I think, a Lebanese Hezbollah official say they're not going to respond. And the Lebanese government has said you shouldn't respond. Iraqi militias have not shown any great enthusiasm to respond. And the Houthis probably will have some capacity for a limited missile firing, but nothing that is such a strategic threat against Israel that it's going to shift the conflict. And in the long run, if you take that timeline out by 5 or 6 more than maybe a year, 2 or 3 years. The Iranian goal, however, is to reconstitute all that and rebuild it, much as they did when they thought Assad was falling in 2013, or they had to restart the entire their Iraqi threats in 2003. We need to recall the Quds force still exists. It still has about 15,000 personnel in it. It still has a massive budget, and they're looking at Africa, places like Sudan, Ethiopia, to rebuild a program. And by the way, a point on Africa, in the IAEA, 3 countries voted against the censure of Iran: Russia, China, Burkina Faso.
Hmm. Hmm. Norm, you spend a great deal of your time, as I mentioned right off the top, traveling throughout the region, meeting with senior officials there. What are going to be some of the indicators that this is actually becoming more destabilizing and not just one event back and forth between Iran and Israel, but more destabilizing for the region? What will you be looking for?
Well, I'll be looking for first to see if local security officials believe the Iranian Quds Force or intelligence services or proxies are targeting Americans, Israelis, or other personnel in their countries as tourists, because that would touch obviously the lives of those individuals, but the tourist industries, the businesses, the investments, et cetera. Secondly, these governments are going to be concerned about the potential of the conflict expanding, which is unlikely at present, and in a way that could impact oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, for Iran to do that, it would have to make a decision that would risk bringing in the GCC and alienating China, in hopes that such pressure would cause the international community to pressure Israel to stop a conflict. That's unlikely at present, okay? There's a big risk for Iran. And last, of course, I'm going to be looking to see if the military action spreads to U.S. bases. And that depends in large amount as whether or not the Iranians perceive, correctly or incorrectly, that the U.S. is playing some role in this attack. If they perceive that, then our bases in the region, our personnel, will be fair game in their view. And that risks also, of course, collateral damage to these governments and their economies. And there you would see airline traffic being shut down. You would see trade being cut. You would see investments being shifted. So the world could change. At present, the region and the United States and Europe are all doing their best to contain this conflict and indeed to end it as quickly as possible. But events are going to have their own momentum over the next few days, and it's going to take a while for this momentum to run its course before we can see what happens.
And we've heard Israel say as well that this is a multi-pronged kind of attack. This isn't a one and done type deal. They have over past years assassinated certain members of nuclear programs in very creative ways, I might add. But as you mentioned right off the top, Norm, the sheer number of people and leaders and levels that were taken out in this operation makes it seem a little bit different. How do you anticipate the next strikes coming? You mentioned if they're targeting missile sites. Talk a little bit more about what Israel may do next.
Well, again, if you look at the names that are reported to have been killed in Iran's leadership, this is extraordinary. We're talking about the head of their aerospace program, the man responsible for missiles and drones, General Hajizadeh. We're talking about the chief of staff, the head of ground forces for the Army, the head of the Navy. There are a lot of names floating around, as well as the inner circle of staff that may have been near these individuals when they were killed. This is going to shut down the command and control, cohesiveness, and efficiency of these units for coming days. And that may produce a false positive. It may produce a lull of activity or an absence of activity that people perceive as a weakness or a decision, where it really just means the process of making the decision is taking a while to get through a new system that is being reconstituted. If you're Israel, once you work in command and control, once you reconfirm that you've got air defense taken care of, once you make sure that you've got missile launchers being reduced a consistent threat for your own homeland, then you focus on, to the extent your operational plan requires, other targets. We don't know what those other targets are, or to what extent. Will it be more nuclear sites? Will it be more leadership sites? Will it be more military industrial programs? Right now, you have this extraordinary situation where Israel has air superiority and freedom of movement throughout the skies of Iran, which again is an extraordinary testimony to their intelligence, training, professionalism, and also the American technology that we have shared with them and the partnership that CENTCOM and EUCOM have built over many years. This is an extraordinary example of American partnership playing its role. I have to tell you one more thing we should focus on. This is the second time in a month that a country has imported into an adversary intelligence personnel with a large number of drones in a substantial operation, and then undertook a Pearl Harbor 9/11, whatever you want to call it, strategic surprise operation that transformed the structural dynamic. And this is a massive defeat for Iran's domestic and external intelligence services, just as the Ukrainian attack against the Russian aircraft was an embarrassing failure for Russian domestic and external intelligence services. And there is a lesson in there, because if places like Mother Russia and Iran, which have a significant counterintelligence capacity in their country, miss these sorts of things, what might happen in the United States or a Western country where our borders are somewhat porous for people being able to bring in material and undertake such operations. So there's a powerful reminder of our need to get our act together here before some adversary does something similar in our country.
Norm, this is maybe the hardest question I'll ask you, and that is one that you asked when we began talking. What does success look like in this operation for Israel? Given the numbers of people who have been taken out, given some of the targets that we know about so far, giving the support from the president just in terms of calling this an excellent operation and really pushing Iran to come back to the negotiating table when it comes to their development of this nuclear energy. What does success look like in your eyes? And when do you think Israel may feel like they have set Iran back far enough from being able to just reconstitute and come back a year later, especially given the allies they're working with now, which are nuclear powers?
So based on the nature of the attacks, as my only point of data, I'm saying for the record, there is an implication of a significant intelligence capacity on the part of Israel. If that capacity has not been reduced by the elimination of targets who might have been sources of intelligence themselves while they were being observed, then Israel is able to then monitor Iranian reaction to these events, which again will be chaotic in the beginning. But Israel could have one of several goals. The first goal could be punish Iran, which is in its most fragile political, economic, and security state since 1988. Punish it to the extent that its leadership, hoping to keep the Islamic Revolution surviving through the next generation of leadership transition, punish them so that they go into the arms of the Trump administration, which continues to say, we're looking for a diplomatic solution, gentlemen. Mm-hmm. And then the supreme leader drinks that cup of poison and gives up enrichment. And if they do that, then Iran doesn't have a path to nuclear weapon. We don't have to worry about their ICBMs in 2035. That's option A. Mm-hmm. Option B, the Israelis have taken out quite a few members of Iran's IRGC and its military and some of its nuclear program it's building there. This could provoke a reduction of the pressure on Iran's people who are being oppressed. And this might be a moment for those people to stand up and say, as millions have done for many years, we would like a different government. Mm-hmm. And that's up to the Iranian people to choose that moment. Last, you could have some variation of that in the middle, where the Iranian government just says, we've taken it on the chin. We've made a firm decision on the inside. My goodness, we never want to build a bomb. Because the idiots who went in that direction, well, they're all underground, and they almost cost us the revolution, and they almost cost us our jobs with unrest. So we're going to make a decision, but we're going to sound tough in public because we just want to sound tough. But the intelligence would tell the Israelis, and perhaps the United States and others, you don't need to worry as much about Iran. But Israel's leadership will need to assess if that's good enough for their goals. We should note the Israelis have lost, knock on wood, God bless them, no personnel so far. It's been a relatively low cost campaign. And it's been humiliating for the Iranian government that only a couple of days ago, one of the individuals who were killed publicly, for some strange reason, decided to go in public and say, we're about to deliver some terrible blow against Israel. And well, he's dead. And I
Yeah.
think many members of his staff are dead. So it's, I think those are the variations of where this is going. And again, there isn't another little twist, I should say. Any of this could produce a very different Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can't just leave it there. You got to give us a little bit more about what you mean by very different Middle
An
East.
Iran that is incapable of being perceived as an offensive actor.
Yeah.
Now it means that if you're a Gulf state, you don't have to listen or worry about Iran as much as you did in the past.
Yeah.
An Iran that is punished more frequently for its mischief and its violence with proxies, well, maybe a Gulf state can undertake some of that punishment on its own as well. If Israel can do it, why can't a Gulf state do it? If with the same American kit. I mean, if the American aircraft, Emirati, not just coming out of the country, Emirati, Saudi pilots, other pilots in the Gulf, they're exceptional pilots.
Mm-hmm.
And if Israeli pilots can perform this way, Gulf pilots can do just as nicely, thank you. And if cyber tools work for the Israelis, cyber tools can work for other countries as well. So suddenly there's an equalizing moment here, and Iran's size and its reputation are being whittled away over these hours. So Iran has got to organize, survive, reset deterrence, and reset its mojo with the region, or there will be consequences.
Yeah, and that would be a very different Middle East indeed, Norm. Norm Roule joining us to kind of bring some context around what we're seeing, and most importantly, in my opinion, check for the indicators that Norm is looking for over the next several days. Norm is former National Intelligence Manager for Iran at ODNI, but recently travels quite frequently to the Middle East, meeting with senior leaders there all throughout the region. Norm, thank you so much for sharing many of your insights with us on this. Thank you.
Suzanne, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to start every day informed and pointed in the right direction with your open source report. And all I can say to you and Brad is work harder, keep it going, because God bless you for what you do. It's great.
Will do. Thank you so much, Norm.